They laughed when I pitched my idea. Not a polite chuckle or a hesitant smile, but a full-on, dismissive laughter that cut deeper than I ever imagined. "This won't work," they said, shaking their heads. "Too ambitious, too expensive, too unrealistic." I left the meeting room with my notes clutched tightly, my hands trembling slightly, feeling the weight of rejection settle on my chest like a stone. I had believed in my idea completely, a small piece of technology that could make work more efficient, smarter, faster, but they didn't see it. They didn't see the potential. For a moment, I doubted myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had miscalculated. I walked out of the office building into the cold air, letting the wind brush against my face, trying to shake off the shame and humiliation. I remember thinking, I will prove them wrong, but I need time. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table, the lamp casting a soft, yellow glow across my papers. I reviewed every comment they had made, every concern, every critique, and instead of letting their words break me, I felt a quiet resolve growing. If they couldn't see the value now, I would create the proof. I would build it myself. Over the next few months, I worked in small increments. Nights became longer, weekends blurred into weekdays. I experimented, coded, tested, and failed more times than I can count. There were moments when I questioned whether this was worth it. I remember one evening, when a critical test failed for the third time, I sat back, closed my eyes, and let out a deep sigh. The room was silent except for the hum of my laptop. I whispered to myself, I can't give up now. Slowly, I began to see progress. Small successes at first, one test passed, a component finally working, a prototype that wasn't perfect but functional. With every small victory, my confidence grew. I realized that what they had dismissed as impossible was just unproven, not worthless. I documented everything carefully, creating a portfolio of results, charts, and demonstrations. My vision was becoming tangible, and I knew that one day, the proof would speak louder than their laughter ever could. During this period, I faced more than just technical challenges. Friends and colleagues expressed concern. "Are you sure this is worth it?" they asked gently. "It's been months, and the original company already moved on. Maybe it's better to focus elsewhere." I smiled, but quietly I shook my head. Their concern was well-meaning, but I felt a fire inside me that I couldn't ignore. I whispered to myself at night, "They'll see. One day they'll see." Slowly, my work gained attention, not from the people who had laughed at me, but from smaller clients, industry peers, and mentors who believed in innovation. They asked questions, showed interest, and offered guidance. I learned patience, humility, and careful persistence. The journey was long, lonely at times, and filled with setbacks, but I understood that real growth often comes from struggle, not applause. 5 years passed. I kept my prototype evolving, iterating, and refining. I had learned every flaw, every edge, and every opportunity hidden within my creation. And then, almost quietly, the world began to notice. One morning, I received an email from a company executive, the same company that had laughed at me years before. They had heard about the technology I had developed, and they wanted a meeting. I read the message twice, disbelief mixing with a rush of calm excitement. It was the moment I had envisioned all those nights in my small kitchen, hours past midnight, fingers aching from typing and coding. I prepared meticulously, reviewing every detail, every improvement I had made, and every piece of evidence that proved the value of my creation. When the day of the meeting arrived, I entered the conference room with confidence, not arrogance. The executives sat across the table, some trying to mask curiosity with professionalism, others clearly trying to regain authority they had lost in their dismissal years before. I began my presentation calmly, showing the data, the results, and the proven applications. I watched their expressions change slowly, from skepticism to surprise, then to realization. The technology they had once rejected was now undeniable. And then came the pivotal moment. One of them asked quietly, "Can we license this?" I nodded, keeping my tone steady as if it were the most natural request in the world. The licensing discussion began, and I realized that the power had shifted subtly but completely. 5 years ago, I had been powerless, humiliated, dismissed. Now I held the key to their solution, their opportunity, and ultimately their success. It was a quiet satisfaction, not loud or vengeful, but deeply fulfilling. I thought of the nights I spent alone, the countless experiments, the failed prototypes, the self-doubt that had threatened to overwhelm me. Every challenge had led to this exact moment. Every humiliation had been transformed into preparation. Every rejection had fueled persistence. After the meeting, I walked out of their building quietly, the city bustling around me, unaware of the quiet triumph that had just taken place inside. The licensing fee would be substantial, yes, but more than that, it was a symbol, a recognition that patience, persistence, and belief in oneself can turn rejection into opportunity. That night, I sat at my desk, looking at the city lights through the window, and reflected. The people who laughed at me had never imagined I would reach this point, but I didn't need them to understand my journey. I only needed to see the path, follow it, and believe. The lesson was clear. Rejection is not the end. Humiliation is not the measure of your worth. If you keep building, keep learning, and keep believing, even the people who doubted you may one day rely on your vision. And when that day comes, the quiet satisfaction is deeper than any applause, because it is earned, deserved, and undeniable. 5 years of effort, of belief, of quiet, relentless work had transformed my life. And as I closed my laptop that night, the soft hum of the city around me, I smiled, not for revenge, but for the journey itself. The journey from humiliation to recognition, from doubt to undeniable success, had shaped not only my career but the person I had become. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything else. After that first meeting with the executives, I thought the hardest part was over, but in reality, it had only just begun. Licensing the technology was not a simple signature on a contract. It involved scrutiny, legal discussions, negotiations, and repeated demonstrations to prove that my solution was not just functional, but scalable, reliable, and valuable. I spent weeks preparing, reviewing every piece of documentation, refining the prototype, and anticipating every question they might ask. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed. The same fear that had haunted me years ago, the fear of failure, the fear of not being taken seriously, crept in quietly, but I reminded myself of the work I had done, the countless nights and months of dedication. I reminded myself that this was the result of years of perseverance, not luck. During one of the negotiation sessions, one of the executives looked me over with a faint smirk. 5 years ago, we thought this idea wouldn't work, he said. Funny how things change. I kept my voice calm, steady, and controlled. Ideas need time, I said softly. Sometimes you need to build them before the world is ready to see them. I could see the surprise flicker in his eyes. He hadn't expected humility mixed with quiet confidence. The negotiations moved slowly, but each meeting revealed a subtle shift in control. I realized that, although I had come seeking licensing approval, I was the one now defining the terms, the one shaping the conversation. My technology had matured, and so had I. I was no longer the nervous, rejected person who left the room years ago. I was prepared, competent, and confident. Still, the process tested me in new ways. Legal teams challenged my patent claims, technical advisors questioned minor functionalities, and internal executives debated whether licensing was worth the investment. Each challenge required patience, clarity, and calm explanation. I never raised my voice, never demanded recognition, but I presented evidence, data, and demonstrations, every fact precise, every point supported. And slowly, the skepticism melted. I began to notice subtle acknowledgments, nods during presentations, whispered comments of approval inside meetings, even quiet compliments on the design and efficiency of my technology. It was satisfying, but I remained focused. My goal was not to humiliate them in return or to gloat about their earlier rejection. My goal was to demonstrate undeniable value and ensure that my creation was recognized and properly licensed. Outside of these meetings, my personal life had changed as well. Friends who had once doubted me now admired my persistence, and mentors who had guided me quietly over the years offered encouragement. I realized that support, even when indirect, had played a role in sustaining me through the years of struggle and isolation. The most powerful moment came when they asked me to provide a detailed demonstration of scalability, the ability for my technology to function across multiple platforms and adapt to different business needs. I prepared a simulation that illustrated exactly that, highlighting improvements I had made over the years, optimizations I had discovered, and efficiencies they had never considered. During the presentation, I noticed the executives leaning forward, eyes wide, taking notes rapidly. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a mix of surprise, realization, and I sensed a touch of embarrassment. The technology that they had dismissed years ago now outperformed many solutions they had invested in. I presented numbers, graphs, and comparisons with calm clarity, letting the evidence speak for itself. One of the senior executives cleared his throat and said quietly, "I suppose we underestimated the potential." I smiled softly. "Potential is meaningless without effort," I replied. "What matters is execution, persistence, and refinement." The room remained quiet, but I could sense the shift, the subtle acknowledgement that the person they had dismissed was now essential to their future plans. In the weeks that followed, I negotiated the licensing agreement carefully. I ensured that terms were fair, that my intellectual property was fully protected, and that the fee reflected both the value of the technology and the years of work that had gone into building it. Every step was deliberate, measured, and professional. I refused to let emotion cloud the process, though inside, a quiet satisfaction burned. I was not angry, I was simply aware of the journey and the transformation that had brought me here. The final meeting, where signatures were placed on the agreement, felt surreal. I sat at the conference table, watching the executives sign their approval, and for a moment I remembered the laughter, the dismissive remarks, the disbelief they had shown 5 years ago. But I didn't dwell on it. Instead, I reflected on the years of effort, the nights spent alone, the countless failures and incremental successes that had led to this moment. It was a triumph not of revenge, but of persistence, skill, and belief in oneself. After the licensing was finalized, I received a call from a former colleague who had been part of the original meeting 5 years ago. "I still can't believe it," he said. "You've done what we thought was impossible. The technology is incredible. And the licensing, wow." I smiled quietly and replied, "It was never impossible. It just took time, focus, and dedication." In the days that followed, the impact of the licensing agreement became clear. The company integrated my technology across multiple departments, optimizing processes, improving efficiency, and reducing costs. I received feedback from engineers, managers, and clients praising the innovation, and I realized that the true value of my work went far beyond the licensing fee. It was changing how the company operated. And yet, the best part was the quiet realization. The people who had laughed at me, who had dismissed my idea, had come to rely on the solution I had built. But there was no bitterness. I understood that their initial rejection had been a catalyst, not a hindrance. It had forced me to grow, refine, and prove the idea myself, and in that, I found fulfillment far deeper than any paycheck or public recognition. Looking back, I understood the subtle lessons of this journey. Rejection does not define worth. Dismissal does not prevent success. Persistence, patience, and quiet effort can turn the tables in ways that are both unexpected and lasting. I also learned that true triumph is calm, deliberate, and understated. There was no need to humiliate, confront, or seek revenge. Success built carefully, quietly, and with integrity speaks louder than any words of the past. And so, as I sat at my desk one evening, reviewing the final reports from the licensing implementation, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not pride, not arrogance, but a calm, reflective joy. The journey had been long, full of setbacks, doubts, and quiet struggles, but it had shaped me into someone capable of turning rejection into recognition, humiliation into opportunity, and an idea dismissed into a critical, licensed solution. And in that quiet moment, I smiled, knowing that the story was not just about technology or licensing fees, but about resilience, patience, and the quiet strength to keep believing in yourself, even when the world laughs. After the licensing deal was finalized, I thought the journey would become smoother, that the validation of my technology would make life easier. But in reality, it brought a new set of challenges, ones I hadn't fully anticipated. The company that had rejected me 5 years ago now depended on my technology, and with dependence came scrutiny. Every update I made, every optimization, and every improvement was watched closely. Executives called meetings almost daily, asking for reports, explanations, and justifications. Some questions were fair, others tinged with doubt, as if they were testing whether I could truly handle the responsibility. I remember one morning, sitting in a glass-walled conference room, listening to a senior manager speak. "We need to ensure this technology scales properly for the next quarter," he said. "Can you guarantee there won't be issues?" I kept my tone calm and steady. "I've tested extensively, and the system is designed for scalability," I replied. "There are always potential risks, but they are minimal and manageable." He nodded slowly, but I could sense the underlying skepticism. It reminded me of the first meeting years ago, the laughter, the dismissive tone. I felt a quiet resolve rise inside me. I wasn't going to be rattled. Instead, I focused on preparation, documentation, and transparent communication. In the weeks that followed, I found myself spending hours analyzing feedback, debugging minor issues, and optimizing performance. There were moments of frustration. Yes, software bugs that refused to resolve, integration problems that seemed minor but caused ripple effects. But I reminded myself that patience and persistence were my allies. Meanwhile, the industry began noticing the technology. Other companies expressed interest, curious about the solution that had transformed one of the largest players in the sector. I began receiving inquiries, invitations to speak at conferences, and requests for pilot programs. It was surreal. The very people who had dismissed me now wanted my advice, my insight, and my innovation. And yet, I approached each opportunity with calm, measured thought. I knew that every move I made could have long-term implications. I also realized that my quiet success had a subtle effect on the people who had once rejected me. Some executives, once dismissive, began approaching me with a newfound respect, albeit restrained. I remember one conversation with a former skeptic, a man who had laughed at my pitch years ago. "I never expected it to work," he said quietly, almost shyly. "You've proved us all wrong." I nodded. "It wasn't about proving anyone wrong," I replied. "It was about making it work." He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to understand that calm, quiet confidence I carried. Beyond the internal challenges, I faced pressure from outside as well. Competitors saw the licensing success and attempted to develop alternative solutions. Some launched similar products, others spread rumors about limitations or weaknesses in my technology. Each time, I remained calm, documenting, testing, and responding with evidence rather than emotion. I learned that the industry respected results, not anger. One turning point came during a critical systems update. A major client experienced issues due to an unforeseen integration problem. They called a crisis meeting, and the executives from the licensing company turned to me. I remember sitting quietly at the table, reviewing the system logs and user reports. I spoke slowly, methodically, explaining the cause, the temporary workaround, and the permanent solution. By the end of the meeting, the executives and clients were reassured, and the issue was resolved efficiently. That day, I realized something important. My work had shifted from creating a product to becoming indispensable. My expertise, diligence, and calm problem-solving had made me a trusted figure, not someone to dismiss, but someone whose insight carried weight. This shift, however, also brought subtle tension. Some employees within the licensing company felt threatened by my influence. Meetings that had once been simple became arenas of quiet power struggles. I navigated these moments carefully, always calm, never confrontational, always presenting facts and solutions. Slowly, I earned trust through competence rather than by asserting authority. Outside of work, life continued quietly. Friends who had supported me during the lonely years were amazed at my transformation, but I rarely spoke of the internal struggles, the late nights, the setbacks. They saw the result, not the journey. And in many ways, that was fine. I had learned to value patience, resilience, and silent effort over immediate recognition. After several months, the company asked me to advise on expansion strategies, to optimize the technology for broader applications, and to consult on projects I hadn't originally designed. I approached this with calm focus, understanding that my role had changed. I was no longer just the inventor, I had become a quiet architect of their success. And yet, I never let ego cloud judgment. I worked with humility, quietly observing, guiding, and implementing solutions with precision. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, the CEO, who had once dismissed my initial pitch, spoke to the board about the importance of my technology. Without this system, he said, our operations would not have achieved this level of efficiency. The work done here reflects years of insight and dedication that we underestimated in the past. I listened quietly, letting the acknowledgement settle without reaction. There was satisfaction, yes, but it was subtle, calm, and reflective. I realized that quiet, consistent effort often speaks louder than confrontation, pride, or anger. Months later, the licensing agreement was renewed with expanded terms, reflecting the broader impact of my technology. The negotiations were smooth, professional, and fair. Once again, I was reminded that the people who had rejected me now relied on my skill and insight. And still, I remained calm. My focus was never revenge, never proving anyone wrong. It was about building, improving, and sustaining something meaningful. Reflecting on these years, I understood that the true transformation was not just in the recognition I had received, but in the person I had become. Rejection, humiliation, and doubt had shaped resilience, focus, and strategic thinking. And the calm patience cultivated over years had made each triumph far more satisfying. By the end of that year, the technology was integrated across multiple divisions, clients were satisfied, and competitors had no choice but to acknowledge its effectiveness. I realized that the journey had taught me more than technical skills. It had taught me the power of quiet persistence, the importance of calm confidence, and the strength that comes from proving oneself through results, not words. And in those quiet moments, as I reviewed reports and planned improvements, I understood that the laughter of 5 years ago no longer mattered. The technology spoke for itself, and so did I. The executives who once rejected me had been forced to recognize not just the value of my creation, but the person behind it, a person shaped by struggle, refined by patience, and defined by unwavering dedication. And in that understanding, I felt a deep, reflective peace. By the beginning of the next year, the licensing agreement had matured into something more significant than I had ever expected. The company that had laughed at me 5 years ago now depended heavily on my technology. Every department, every major project, relied on the systems I had developed. I was no longer just an inventor or consultant, I was quietly indispensable. And with that importance came subtle power, influence, and responsibility. I noticed small changes in the executives' behavior. Meetings were longer, more attentive, and filled with cautious questions rather than dismissive remarks. They began asking for my opinions before making decisions related to technology integration. It was a subtle reversal of roles, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in that. One morning, I received an unexpected email from the CFO requesting a private discussion about the licensing fee. My heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. They had agreed to pay a standard fee initially, but now they were asking to renegotiate. I knew this could be a moment to assert the true value of my work, but I also knew the importance of careful strategy. I spent days preparing, reviewing financial reports, assessing the impact of my technology on their operations, and calculating the fair market value. I wanted the fee to reflect the actual worth, not just in monetary terms, but in recognition of years of effort and innovation. When the meeting arrived, I walked into the room calmly. The CFO and two senior executives were already seated, their expressions professional, but I could sense the underlying tension. "We want to discuss the licensing agreement," the CFO began. "Given the scale and impact of your technology, we are prepared to adjust the terms." However, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We need to ensure it's within our budget constraints." I nodded slowly, keeping my tone steady. "I understand," I said, "and I've prepared a detailed report outlining the measurable impact, cost savings, and efficiency improvements your company has gained from this technology." I placed the binder on the table, letting them review every page. Charts, graphs, comparisons, and projections filled the pages. I watched quietly as they flipped through, absorbing each detail. I could see the expressions change, initial skepticism giving way to realization, then subtle acknowledgement. "These numbers. I didn't realize the extent," one executive murmured. "It's significant." I smiled slightly, not triumphantly but calmly. "The technology has evolved over 5 years," I said softly. "The results speak for themselves." Negotiations continued, back and forth, with questions, clarifications, and counteroffers. I remained calm, measured, and patient, never raising my voice, never showing irritation. I had learned that the quiet, deliberate approach carried far more weight than confrontation or anger. Hours passed, and finally they nodded. The licensing fee was increased to reflect both the tangible and intangible value of the technology. The deal was finalized with signatures, and I felt a quiet, deep satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was about recognition, fairness, and the acknowledgement of effort that had once been dismissed. After the meeting, I walked through the company offices and noticed subtle changes. Executives approached me with questions and guidance requests. Employees sought advice on implementation, and even the CEO now paused to greet me personally with a nod of respect. The shift was subtle but undeniable. I realized that the value of my work was not just in the technology itself, but in the trust, expertise, and reliability I had demonstrated over the years. And yet, with influence came new challenges. Some internal teams, threatened by my growing authority, began pushing back against suggestions, questioning methods, or presenting alternative ideas. I navigated these carefully, always with calm explanation, evidence, and patience. I learned that leadership wasn't about asserting dominance, but about earning trust through consistency and integrity. Beyond the office, life had continued quietly. Friends celebrated with me, but I rarely spoke of the tense negotiations or subtle victories. I had learned to value inner satisfaction over external applause. The real triumph was knowing I had endured, persevered, and emerged stronger than the circumstances that once humiliated me. Months later, the licensing technology began to expand into new departments and regions. The company realized that my work was not just a tool but a framework, an innovation capable of transforming operations across the board. Clients praised the results, and industry peers reached out, intrigued by the technology that had been initially dismissed. In quiet moments, I reflected on the irony. Those who had mocked me were now dependent on the very work they once derided. But there was no desire for humiliation, no need for revenge. The satisfaction was in the transformation itself, the quiet shift from dismissal to reliance, from mockery to acknowledgement. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I returned to my small apartment, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the journey, the initial rejection, the long nights of work, the failures and minor victories, and now this turning point where recognition had finally arrived. I realized that patience, persistence, and integrity had been far more powerful than any moment of anger or resentment could have been. And then came the subtle twist. A competitor, aware of the licensing deal, approached me directly with an offer to license the technology for their operations. They offered not just a fee, but a long-term partnership that could expand the reach of my innovation far beyond the company that had originally rejected me. I paused, considering the opportunity carefully. It was tempting, yes, but I knew the importance of maintaining professional integrity and honoring the agreement I had already established. I responded thoughtfully, proposing collaboration in a way that was fair, transparent, and respectful of both parties. This move further solidified my reputation in the industry, not just as an innovator, but as someone who handled challenges with professionalism, foresight, and calm authority. The story of my initial rejection had now come full circle. The people who had once laughed at my idea had not only licensed it but relied on it. Other companies recognized its value and sought partnership, and through it all, I had maintained quiet confidence, integrity, and patience. Looking back, I understood the subtle lessons. The initial humiliation had sparked determination, rejection had fueled innovation, and consistent effort had earned respect. The technology was more than a product. It was a reflection of years of persistence, learning, and strategic growth, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing it recognized, adopted, and expanded was far more rewarding than any public acknowledgement or dramatic revenge could have been. By the end of the year, the licensing fee, combined with subsequent partnerships, had elevated my career, my reputation, and my confidence. But more importantly, it had reaffirmed a principle I had carried through every challenge. Success achieved through patience, skill, and integrity carries a deeper, more lasting fulfillment than any instant victory or external approval. As I closed my laptop that night, I smiled softly. The laughter of years ago was gone, replaced by calm recognition. The rejection, once painful, had become a catalyst. And the journey, marked by quiet persistence, careful planning, and strategic execution, had transformed not only my career but my understanding of resilience, patience, and true success. By the time the licensing deal had fully taken effect, I had become an unseen force within the company, a quiet presence whose work drove efficiency, innovation, and growth. Yet, even with this recognition, new challenges emerged, ones I hadn't anticipated when I first started. Some executives were clearly uncomfortable with my influence. They had once dismissed me, laughed at my ideas, and now they depended on them. Human nature being what it is, subtle rivalries and quiet skepticism began to surface. I noticed it in meetings, a hesitant question phrased to undermine, a dismissive glance at a suggestion I made, or a competitor subtly trying to sway the team toward a different approach. I didn't react angrily. Instead, I listened, assessed, and responded with calm, measured answers backed by data and evidence. Over time, I realized that my greatest challenge was no longer technical, it was relational. I had to navigate office politics, egos, and subtle power struggles, all while maintaining the integrity of the technology I had built. I began to see that true success required more than innovation. It required patience, diplomacy, and strategic communication. One afternoon, a senior manager approached me privately. "There's talk among some of the team," he said cautiously, "that you're making decisions without consulting them. Some are frustrated." I nodded slowly. "I understand," I replied. "I'm not here to take anyone's place. My role is to ensure the technology functions optimally, but I'll make an effort to involve the team more in decisions." That simple acknowledgement diffused tension. It wasn't about ego, it was about collaboration and trust. In the following weeks, I spent more time mentoring junior staff, guiding project teams, and ensuring that everyone understood the systems I had built. Slowly, the culture shifted. The initial resistance and quiet rivalry faded, replaced with respect, acknowledgement, and a willingness to collaborate. I realized that leadership wasn't about asserting authority, it was about building trust, demonstrating competence, and showing patience. Amid all this, the industry continued to take notice. Other companies, competitors, and clients sought my insight, and the technology I had created began to be recognized as a benchmark for innovation. Conferences invited me to speak, Articles praised the efficiency and adaptability of my system. Invitations arrived for advisory roles. Each new opportunity reminded me of how far I had come, from humiliation and rejection to being a recognized authority in my field. But the journey was far from over. One morning, I received a confidential message from the CEO of the company that had originally laughed at my pitch. "We're considering an expansion into new markets," the message read. "Your technology will play a central role, but we need guidance. Can we meet?" I prepared meticulously, reviewing all the systems, analyzing market trends, and preparing strategies for scalability. I understood that this meeting would not just test my technical skill, but also my strategic thinking, my ability to influence decisions, and my capacity to navigate high-stakes discussions. The meeting began calmly. Executives outlined their plans, expectations, and concerns. I listened attentively, asked clarifying questions, and presented data-driven strategies for integration, adaptation, and risk mitigation. I spoke slowly, deliberately, ensuring clarity and demonstrating both competence and calm authority. By the end of the meeting, the executives nodded, visibly impressed with the depth of preparation and insight. It was clear that my role had shifted from inventor to strategic advisor, a subtle but meaningful elevation. Yet with this responsibility came new pressure. One of the executives, subtly and almost casually, suggested exploring alternative technologies, hinting that they might consider a competitor if it promised faster results or lower costs. The suggestion was polite but pointed. I kept my expression neutral, my tone calm. "We can certainly explore options," I said, "but the evidence and results of the current system demonstrate its reliability, efficiency, and adaptability. Any alternative would require significant testing and integration time, which could delay overall progress." I could see the acknowledgement in their eyes. My words were measured, not defensive, but they carried the weight of years of proven results. Still, I realized that my influence, though significant, was always subject to subtle power dynamics. I had to maintain focus, patience, and strategic calm at every step. Over the next months, the licensing technology was expanded further into new divisions, markets, and international clients. The company relied on me not just for the systems themselves, but for guidance, optimization, and oversight. The impact was measurable. Productivity increased, errors decreased, and clients expressed satisfaction. The executives who had once laughed at my pitch now depended on my insight and trusted my judgment. Yet, I never let pride or ego dictate my actions. I worked quietly, consistently, and with humility. Outside of the office, life remained calm but reflective. Friends marveled at the transformation, noting how I had gone from being dismissed to being indispensable. I rarely spoke of the struggles, the loneliness, or the nights spent refining the system. Instead, I let the results speak. But deep inside, I knew that the path had shaped me more than the destination. Every rejection, every moment of humiliation, every setback had prepared me for this moment of influence, respect, and recognition. Then came a subtle turning point. A competitor, a company I had briefly met during an industry seminar, approached me directly. They were impressed by the licensing success and offered a partnership for a new application of the technology. They proposed not just a fee, but long-term collaboration and shared development. I paused, carefully considering the implications. The opportunity was significant, but I had to weigh it against my existing commitments, integrity, and professional relationships. After deliberation, I responded thoughtfully, proposing collaboration that was fair, transparent, and beneficial to all parties. This move enhanced my reputation as someone capable of balancing opportunity, ethics, and strategic growth. Looking back, I realized that this phase of the journey, the period after licensing, was a true test of resilience, patience, and professionalism. It was no longer about proving others wrong. It was about sustaining success, navigating subtle challenges, and maintaining integrity while expanding influence. The executives who had once dismissed me had been forced to acknowledge my skill, insight, and leadership. But the real satisfaction lay not in their recognition, but in the quiet knowledge that consistent effort, patience, and calm strategy could turn rejection into opportunity, skepticism into reliance, and humiliation into quiet, lasting triumph. In the end, I understood that the story was not about revenge. It was about transformation, growth, and the subtle power of perseverance. Each challenge, setback, and tense interaction had shaped my understanding of leadership, innovation, and success. And in the quiet moments, as I reviewed reports, planned strategies, and guided implementation, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from applause, not from recognition, but from knowing that I had endured, learned, and quietly achieved what once seemed impossible. The laughter of the past had faded. In its place was calm acknowledgement, quiet influence, and the enduring satisfaction of having built something meaningful, respected, and lasting. Months passed, and the impact of the licensing agreement continued to unfold. The technology I had developed was no longer just a tool. It had become the backbone of operations, the quiet engine driving efficiency and innovation. Executives began to rely on me not only for guidance, but also for strategic decisions, seeking my opinion on everything from implementation schedules to potential expansion into new markets. I had become indispensable, yet I remained calm and focused, never allowing pride or ego to dictate my actions. One afternoon, I was invited to a high-level strategy meeting with the CEO and the board of directors. It was unusual. They rarely involved me directly in such meetings, but the scope of a planned expansion required my expertise. As I walked into the room, I noticed the subtle changes in demeanor. Executives who had once been skeptical now listened attentively, taking notes, asking questions, and valuing my input. It was a quiet reversal, and I felt a calm satisfaction. The discussion began with an outline of the expansion plan. "We want to implement this technology across all new divisions," the CEO explained. "Your insight will be critical for ensuring success." I listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and presented a structured approach for deployment, highlighting potential challenges and solutions. Throughout the meeting, I noticed one particular board member, a man who had been especially dismissive during my initial pitch 5 years ago. He listened silently, occasionally jotting down notes, his expression unreadable. I focused on my presentation, keeping my tone steady, deliberate, and confident. I wasn't seeking revenge, but I knew that the results of my work spoke for themselves. By the end of the session, the board nodded in agreement. The strategy was approved, and the deployment schedule was finalized. I quietly observed the subtle acknowledgement in their expressions, the recognition that the person they had once dismissed was now central to their future success. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call from the CFO. "We'd like to discuss expanding the licensing agreement," he said. "Your technology has proven so valuable that we want to formalize a long-term arrangement with higher compensation and additional support for ongoing development." I took a deep breath, feeling a quiet thrill, and agreed to a meeting. When the discussion began, I presented detailed metrics demonstrating the technology's impact: increased productivity, cost savings, and improved client satisfaction. I outlined the potential for further innovation, scalability, and adaptability. The executives were impressed. The negotiation that followed was tense, not in a confrontational way, but in the careful scrutiny of terms and conditions. I remained calm, measured, and focused, ensuring that every point was clear, fair, and backed by evidence. Finally, after several rounds of discussion, the new licensing agreement was finalized. The financial terms reflected not only the tangible value of my technology, but also the years of work, refinement, and persistence that had led to this moment. I felt a quiet, deep satisfaction, not from the money itself, but from the acknowledgement of effort, skill, and vision. In the months that followed, the implementation of the expanded licensing deal began. My technology was now integrated into international operations, supporting new clients, and adapting to different regulatory environments. I worked closely with global teams, guiding integration, troubleshooting challenges, and mentoring local engineers. The reach of my creation had grown far beyond my initial vision, and the satisfaction of seeing it succeed was profound. Yet, as the impact of my work expanded, subtle tension arose within the company. Some executives felt threatened by my influence, fearing that reliance on my technology and guidance might overshadow their authority. Meetings became carefully calculated, with questions designed to test my judgment or challenge my recommendations. I navigated these moments with patience, diplomacy, and calm reasoning, always responding with facts, data, and evidence rather than emotion. Over time, respect replaced tension. People began to understand that my role was not to dominate or control, but to ensure the success of the systems and the organization. One evening, after a long day of global coordination, I sat quietly in my apartment, reflecting on the journey. 5 years ago, I had been humiliated, dismissed, and laughed at. Now I was trusted, respected, and sought after. The path had been long, filled with setbacks, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt, but every challenge had shaped me, strengthened my resolve, and honed my skills. And then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. A competing technology firm, aware of the success and expansion of my systems, approached me with an offer, a partnership that included not only licensing but joint development, shared revenue, and potential equity in a new venture. The proposal was tempting, offering unprecedented opportunities for growth, influence, and financial gain. I took time to consider it carefully, weighing the benefits against my current commitments, professional integrity, and long-term vision. After deliberate thought, I accepted, structuring the partnership in a way that ensured fairness, transparency, and mutual benefit. The collaboration began quietly, focusing on innovation, improvement, and broader implementation. The results were remarkable. My technology evolved further, now serving diverse industries and applications. My influence extended beyond the original company, and the impact of my work was visible on a much larger scale. Yet, the true triumph was not in recognition, compensation, or opportunity. It was in the quiet realization that years of persistence, patience, and calm effort had transformed my life. I had turned rejection into opportunity, humiliation into respect, and doubt into undeniable success. Occasionally, I would think of the people who had laughed at my original idea. I did not feel anger or a desire for revenge. The satisfaction I felt was quiet, reflective, and deeply personal. It was a recognition that effort, consistency, and belief in oneself can overcome skepticism, rejection, and adversity. By the end of the year, the financial and professional impact of my work was substantial. The expanded licensing agreements, global partnerships, and innovative developments had solidified my reputation in the industry. Executives who once mocked me now sought my advice, respected my judgment, and acknowledged the vision and effort that had brought this technology to life. And yet, the greatest reward remained the personal journey, the transformation from humiliation to mastery, from doubt to confidence, from rejection to undeniable achievement. One quiet evening, as I reviewed the latest implementation reports, I realized the full scope of what had occurred. The journey had not just been about technology or business success. It had been about resilience, patience, integrity, and the quiet power of perseverance. I smiled softly, feeling a calm, reflective satisfaction. The laughter, dismissiveness, and skepticism of years ago had faded into the past. In its place was trust, acknowledgement, and the knowledge that persistence, skill, and quiet determination can create lasting, meaningful success. And as I closed my laptop, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I understood that the real lesson of this journey was timeless. Rejection does not define worth, humiliation does not determine destiny, and consistent effort, guided by integrity and patience, can turn even the harshest skepticism into acknowledgement, respect, and opportunity. By the time the second year of the expanded licensing agreement arrived, I had settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. My technology was no longer just a product, it had become a trusted framework that guided operations, decisions, and strategies across multiple regions. Every success reinforced the value of persistence, patience, and careful effort. Yet, with growing influence came subtle tensions. Some executives, while outwardly respectful, still struggled with the idea that a person they had once dismissed now held expertise they relied upon. It was never hostile, never confrontational, but I could feel the quiet resistance. I handled it with the same calm patience I had learned over the years. I listened, guided, and demonstrated value consistently, letting results speak louder than words. One afternoon, a senior manager approached me privately. "There's some concern among the teams," he said quietly, "that your methods are too rigid. They feel they are being overshadowed." I nodded slowly. "I understand," I replied. "My goal isn't to overshadow anyone, it's to ensure success. I'll involve them more in the process and provide guidance rather than directives." That small conversation made a big difference. Slowly, the teams began to trust me, not just as a consultant or inventor, but as someone who could mentor, guide, and help them grow alongside the technology. Meanwhile, the industry continued to notice the impact of my work. Invitations arrived to speak at conferences, write articles, and consult with other organizations. Some competitors, envious of the licensing success, tried to develop similar solutions, but none matched the precision, scalability, or efficiency of the system I had built. Each inquiry, each request for advice, reinforced a quiet truth: the journey from rejection to recognition was complete, but the work of influence, trust, and leadership never ended. Then came a moment that shifted everything in an unexpected way. One morning, I received a call from the CEO of the company. His tone was measured but urgent. "We've received interest from investors in acquiring a stake in your technology," he said. "We need to discuss the implications and potential opportunities." My mind raced calmly. This was the ultimate validation, not just that the technology worked, but that it had value far beyond our current operations. I prepared meticulously, analyzing financials, projections, and the potential for partnerships. When we met, the discussion was professional but intense. Investors wanted assurance, clear metrics, and a roadmap for future development. I presented data, timelines, and scalability plans, keeping my tone steady and deliberate. The executives listened intently, taking notes, nodding, and occasionally asking detailed questions. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the technology was now a sought-after asset, and my role had evolved once again, from inventor to strategist, to someone whose insight determined the future trajectory of a valuable intellectual property. In the weeks that followed, negotiations with investors began. I stayed involved closely, ensuring that the licensing agreement was protected, that any new partnerships respected the original terms, and that the technology would continue to be implemented responsibly. The process was slow and careful, but I remained patient. It was important that every detail was clear, every term fair, and every risk accounted for. During one particularly long session, the CFO remarked quietly, "It's remarkable how far this has come. 5 years ago, we laughed at the idea, and now investors are lining up for it." I smiled softly. "Ideas take time, and execution is everything," I replied. The statement was simple, calm, but it carried the weight of years of effort, failure, and perseverance. Meanwhile, the original executives who had once dismissed me began to show subtle acknowledgement. Some apologized quietly for their past skepticism. Others expressed admiration for the thoroughness, reliability, and strategic insight I had demonstrated. I didn't dwell on it. I accepted it with quiet grace, understanding that respect earned through consistent effort is far more meaningful than words spoken out of guilt or obligation. During this period, I also received a personal invitation from a former college peer. the same one who had mocked my abilities early on. He requested a meeting under the guise of discussing potential collaboration. I agreed, curious to see how the tables had turned. We met in a quiet cafe, and as he sipped his coffee, he said, "I have to admit, I underestimated you. Your technology, your strategy, it's impressive. I see now what I missed years ago." I nodded calmly. "I'm glad you recognize the value now," I said softly. "But it wasn't about proving you wrong. It was about seeing it through, building it, and ensuring it worked." There was a pause. He looked thoughtful, perhaps slightly ashamed, but the moment wasn't for humiliation or confrontation. It was simply recognition of what had been accomplished. Around the same time, the investor negotiations concluded. The terms were favorable, the licensing fees were substantial, and additional partnerships opened new avenues for development. Financially, professionally, and personally, the journey had reached a point of profound achievement. Yet, I felt no desire to gloat or seek revenge. My satisfaction was quiet, reflective, and deeply personal. It was the culmination of years of patience, resilience, and deliberate effort. And still, there were subtle lessons. I realized that the initial humiliation, rejection, and skepticism were catalysts. They had forced me to refine the technology, persist in the face of doubt, and develop skills that went far beyond invention alone. Leadership, diplomacy, and strategic thinking had become as critical as technical expertise. In the months that followed, I continued to guide implementation, mentor teams, and expand the technology's reach. My role had shifted from being a creator to being a custodian of a valuable system, ensuring its integrity, reliability, and continued success. Looking back on those 5 years, I understood the quiet power of persistence. The laughter, dismissal, and skepticism of the past had shaped me into someone capable of navigating complex challenges, gaining respect, and achieving recognition, not through confrontation, but through calm, deliberate effort and consistent excellence. And so, as I sat at my desk one evening, reviewing reports from global teams, I felt a deep, reflective satisfaction. The journey had been long, filled with setbacks, doubt, and quiet struggle, but it had forged resilience, skill, and insight. The recognition, financial rewards, and respect that followed were gratifying, but the true triumph lay in the quiet knowledge that I had endured, persisted, and built something lasting, meaningful, and undeniable. The executives who once mocked me had become reliant on my insight. Former peers who doubted me now sought advice. Investors recognized the tangible and intangible value of my work, and through it all, I had maintained integrity, calm focus, and deliberate effort. The journey had not been about revenge. It had been about transformation, growth, and enduring impact. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I smiled softly, knowing that the true measure of success was not external applause, but the satisfaction of having navigated humiliation, rejection, and doubt with patience, skill, and unwavering belief in oneself. The months following the investor deal were unlike anything I had ever experienced. My technology, once dismissed and mocked, was now not just a licensed product, it had become an industry standard, admired, studied, and applied in ways I had never imagined. Every morning, I received updates on how different divisions were implementing my systems, how clients were seeing measurable improvements, and how competitors were attempting, unsuccessfully, to replicate the results. It was a quiet validation, far deeper than any applause or recognition. I continued to approach my work with calm focus, understanding that influence is earned through consistent, thoughtful action, not words or confrontation. The company that had rejected me now depended on my judgment and guidance. Executives consulted me on everything related to technology, workflow, and strategic expansion. It was subtle, yet the shift in dynamics was profound. I noticed the careful way some of the senior staff now spoke to me, how they weighed my suggestions, and how quietly they deferred to my expertise. One day, I received an invitation to a private meeting with the CEO. The topic was serious. They wanted to discuss further expansion into international markets and how my technology could be adapted for broader applications. The gravity of the meeting was clear, but I remained calm. I spent hours preparing, analyzing market data, potential risks, and strategies for adaptation. When I walked into the room, the executive's expressions reflected both respect and cautious expectation. I listened carefully as the CEO outlined the vision, then presented my insights. The system can scale, I explained, but certain processes will need adjustments to meet local regulations and cultural workflows. Here are the proposed solutions. As I detailed each point, I noticed nods, scribbles on notepads, and subtle glances of approval. The tension from past skepticism had melted away, replaced with recognition and trust. Yet, even with this acknowledgement, there were reminders of the subtle power dynamics that had always existed. Some executives still questioned every detail, others suggested alternative approaches, occasionally challenging me in ways that tested my patience. I responded with calm reasoning, evidence, and thoughtful solutions. In every challenge, I reminded myself that influence is sustained not through force, but through consistent competence, patience, and integrity. A few weeks later, news arrived that would mark the true turning point. A major investor had offered to acquire a substantial stake in the technology, not to take control, but to partner and scale it further. The financial opportunity was immense, but more than that, it was validation that the work I had dedicated years to had value recognized far beyond the company that had initially rejected me. I carefully analyzed the proposal, consulting quietly with trusted advisors. I wanted to ensure that any deal preserved the integrity of the technology, respected existing agreements, and positioned it for long-term impact. Negotiations were delicate, stretching over several weeks. Each term, each clause was scrutinized. I remained calm, deliberate, and professional throughout, knowing that patience was as critical here as it had been in every step of this journey. When the agreement was finalized, the licensing fees, equity participation, and partnership terms far exceeded anything I had initially imagined. It was not just a financial victory, it was the culmination of years of resilience, perseverance, and skill. The company that had mocked me was now not only relying on my technology, but also indirectly participating in its expansion and success. I felt a quiet satisfaction that went beyond monetary reward. In parallel, I began receiving calls from other firms, some international, some competitors, all curious about the technology, seeking partnerships, and requesting consulting services. Invitations to conferences, panels, and interviews poured in. And yet I remained grounded, focused on the work itself rather than the recognition it brought. One particularly memorable moment occurred when my former college peer, the one who had once mocked me mercilessly, contacted me, expressing a desire to collaborate. We met in a quiet cafe, and he admitted, "I underestimated you. I didn't realize how far you'd come." I smiled softly. "It wasn't about proving anyone wrong," I said. "It was about seeing the work through, making it succeed, and learning along the way." There was no bitterness, no need for revenge. The journey had taught me that true satisfaction comes from enduring, learning, and achieving through integrity, skill, and persistence, not through confrontation or humiliation. Months later, the company formally announced the expansion of the technology into new markets, with my partnership explicitly recognized in internal communications. Employees who had once doubted me now sought guidance, eager to learn, adapt, and implement. Executives who had laughed at my pitch had become dependent on my expertise, and yet my approach remained calm and measured, grounded in professionalism rather than pride or ego. During this period, I also reflected deeply on the personal growth I had undergone. The humiliation of the past had been painful, but it had forced me to refine my skills, cultivate patience, and develop resilience. Rejection had become a teacher, guiding me to strategies, solutions, and a mindset that ultimately shaped not only my career but my perspective on success. One quiet evening, as I reviewed the latest implementation reports from teams across multiple regions, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The laughter, dismissiveness, and doubt that had once shadowed my path were now replaced by calm acknowledgement, respect, and the tangible results of persistence. I realized that the journey had taught me more than technical skill or financial success. It had taught me the value of patience, integrity, and quiet determination. And then came a subtle, yet deeply satisfying twist. A competitor, one of the firms that had once openly dismissed my technology, approached me directly, seeking a partnership under terms I controlled. The irony was unmistakable. Those who had once doubted me were now seeking collaboration. I approached the opportunity with calm deliberation, structuring a partnership that ensured fairness, preserved the technology's integrity, and allowed me to guide implementation. The deal further solidified my reputation, not through ego or confrontation, but through strategic calm and proven competence. Looking back, I understood the true power of persistence. The humiliation, rejection, and doubt of the past had become catalysts for growth. The quiet, deliberate effort had turned skepticism into reliance, mockery into acknowledgement, and doubt into tangible, lasting success. And in the calm, reflective moments at my desk, I understood that the greatest triumph was not financial, professional, or public. It was personal. It was the knowledge that I had endured, persisted, and quietly built something meaningful and undeniable. By the end of the year, my technology was recognized as a benchmark for excellence, innovation, and reliability. The executives who had once mocked me now sought my counsel. Former peers now looked to me with respect. Investors and collaborators recognized both the value of the work and the integrity with which it had been developed. And through it all, I remained grounded, calm, and quietly satisfied. The journey had never been about revenge. It had been about growth, perseverance, and the transformative power of consistent effort. And as I closed my laptop that evening, watching the city lights flicker outside my window, I felt a deep, reflective peace. The laughter and skepticism of the past had faded. In their place was quiet acknowledgement, enduring influence, and the subtle but profound satisfaction of having turned rejection into opportunity, humiliation into respect, and doubt into undeniable achievement. As the technology continued to expand into new markets and industries, I began to see the true scope of what had been accomplished. What started as an idea dismissed and mocked by the very people who should have supported it had grown into a system that businesses relied upon across regions and sectors. Every report, every client update, and every successful implementation reminded me that persistence, patience, and quiet determination were more powerful than any public recognition or dramatic revenge could ever be. Despite the growing acclaim and financial rewards, I remained grounded. My satisfaction was not in the attention or the money, but in knowing that I had navigated humiliation and doubt with integrity, skill, and focus. Occasionally, I reflected on those early days, how my ideas were rejected, how peers mocked my perceived low status or inexperience, and how even my family had expressed quiet doubt. Those memories no longer carried pain, only lessons. I had learned that rejection can sharpen resolve, that skepticism can fuel innovation, and that perseverance can turn humiliation into acknowledgement. One day, I received an email from a major international client requesting a personal consultation. They had been impressed with the technology's scalability and wanted advice on implementing it across multiple divisions in different countries. The message was polite but urgent, reflecting both respect and reliance on my expertise. I scheduled a video call, preparing meticulously to offer insights, recommendations, and strategies for smooth deployment. As the meeting began, executives from multiple continents joined, asking questions about workflow optimization, potential pitfalls, and efficiency metrics. I responded calmly, methodically, and with evidence-backed guidance. There was no need to assert authority. The results spoke for themselves. During the call, one executive, clearly impressed, remarked quietly, It's remarkable how your system works seamlessly across such different environments. I smiled softly, my voice calm. The system was designed to be adaptable, but the success comes from careful planning, consistent testing, and understanding the unique needs of each environment. The acknowledgement was subtle but deeply satisfying. I realized that the true reward of my efforts was not in the applause, but in quiet, professional respect earned over time. Later that week, I received an unexpected message from a former colleague, the one who had been most critical during the early stages. He asked for a meeting, and I agreed, curious to see what he would say. When we met, he looked uneasy, almost sheepish. "I wanted to apologize," he began. "I underestimated you. The work you've done, the impact you've had, it's incredible. I regret dismissing you all those years ago." I nodded calmly. "I appreciate that, but the past is just that, the past. What matters is the work, the results, and moving forward." There was no gloating, no need for revenge. The satisfaction I felt was quiet, internal, and deeply personal. It came from knowing that consistent effort, skill, and patience had earned acknowledgement, respect, and tangible results. Around the same time, the investor partnerships I had formed began to show significant returns. Revenue streams increased, new collaborations expanded the reach of the technology, and opportunities for further innovation appeared on the horizon. Yet, despite the growing scale and success, I remained focused on the core principles that had carried me through years of rejection and doubt: integrity, patience, and consistent effort. One afternoon, the CEO of the original company requested a private meeting. The discussion was about succession planning, as he was considering retirement in the near future. He spoke candidly. "Your work has transformed this company. Your guidance has shaped our future. When I step down, I hope you will continue to provide leadership and mentorship. You've become more integral than anyone could have imagined." I listened quietly, feeling a subtle, profound sense of accomplishment, not because of position, authority, or recognition, but because the journey had come full circle. The person who had once been dismissed and mocked was now trusted to help guide the future of an entire organization. Shortly after, I was invited to speak at a major industry conference. As I prepared my talk, I reflected on the years of struggle, rejection, and quiet effort. The speech was simple, heartfelt, and focused on the lessons learned: perseverance, patience, integrity, and the power of quiet determination. I shared my journey not to boast, but to inspire those who might be facing skepticism, doubt, or humiliation. After the speech, several attendees approached me personally, thanking me for sharing my story. They expressed admiration, curiosity, and hope that they could apply similar principles in their own lives and careers. It was a subtle but deeply fulfilling acknowledgement of the impact my experience could have beyond the immediate work. As the months went by, I continued to guide implementation, consult on strategic expansions, and refine the technology. The company that had once rejected me relied on my guidance more than ever, and former peers who had doubted me now sought advice and collaboration. I realized that the true power of my work was not in financial success, recognition, or revenge, but in the quiet influence it allowed me to have: the ability to shape, guide, and support meaningful progress. One evening, as I reviewed global performance reports, I paused and reflected on the journey. From humiliation to quiet recognition, from rejection to enduring success, the path had been long, challenging, and sometimes lonely. Yet every obstacle had shaped me, every setback had refined my skills, and every moment of doubt had strengthened my resilience. And then, in a subtle but deeply satisfying moment, I received a message from a former peer who had once mocked me publicly. He wrote, "I've realized how wrong I was. Your work is remarkable, and I hope to learn from you in the future." I read the message slowly, smiled softly, and put the phone down. There was no desire for gloating, no need for vindication. The quiet satisfaction of the journey, the knowledge that skill, patience, and integrity had created undeniable success, was more than enough. Over time, I began mentoring new innovators and entrepreneurs, sharing insights about strategy, persistence, and professional growth. I encouraged them not to seek revenge or approval, but to focus on consistent effort, skill development, and resilience. The lessons I had learned through humiliation, rejection, and quiet struggle became a guide for others. Looking back on those years, I realized the true value of the journey. The initial rejection, the laughter of peers, the doubt and skepticism, all had been catalysts for growth, shaping not only my career but my perspective on success, resilience, and integrity. And in the quiet moments, when reports were reviewed, strategies implemented, and teams guided, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had not been about revenge or proving others wrong. It had been about transformation, quiet perseverance, and achieving results that spoke louder than words. As I closed my laptop one evening, I looked out at the city lights. The path from rejection to recognition, from humiliation to influence, and from doubt to undeniable success had been long and challenging, but it had forged resilience, confidence, and quiet pride. And in that moment, I understood the subtle, enduring truth. Success achieved through integrity, patience, and consistent effort carries a satisfaction that no external recognition, mockery, or revenge could ever provide. The laughter of the past was gone, replaced by quiet acknowledgement, enduring respect, and the profound personal satisfaction of having transformed humiliation into opportunity, doubt into recognition, and rejection into lasting impact. The final year of the licensing and partnership agreements arrived quietly, almost unremarkably, but it carried a weight of fulfillment that words rarely capture. By now, my technology had not only transformed the company that had once dismissed it, but it also influenced entire industries. Global clients relied on its adaptability, efficiency, and reliability. The system I had developed from scratch, the one mocked and rejected in its infancy, had become indispensable. Yet amid all this success, I remained calm, grounded, and reflective. I understood that the real triumph was not in financial reward, accolades, or external recognition, but in the quiet, personal satisfaction of enduring, persisting, and creating something meaningful. The journey from humiliation to influence had been long, layered, and deeply formative. One morning, I received a call from the CEO, now preparing for retirement. His voice was steady, tinged with an unusual warmth. "I wanted to speak with you directly," he said. "As I step back, I want you to know how integral your work has been. The technology, the strategy, the guidance, you've shaped the company's future. I hope you will continue to mentor, guide, and provide oversight as we transition into this next phase." I felt a quiet swell of pride, not from ego, but from recognition that years of patient effort and perseverance had culminated in this acknowledgement. I nodded softly. "Thank you. I will continue to support the company and ensure that the systems operate as intended." That afternoon, I walked through the office corridors, noticing subtle differences in tone and demeanor. Executives who had once dismissed me greeted me with respect. Junior staff sought guidance, eager to learn and contribute. The culture had shifted in part because of the technology, but also because of the way it had been implemented, with patience, integrity, and deliberate effort. As the months passed, the impact of the technology extended even further. International clients requested expansions and collaborations. Competitors attempted to replicate the system, but the unique combination of adaptability, strategy, and oversight made it difficult for anyone to match. Each successful implementation reinforced the quiet truth I had learned years ago. Consistent effort, skill, and integrity build influence and respect far more effectively than confrontation or vindication ever could. Then came a moment that crystallized the personal dimension of this journey. A former college rival, the one who had once mocked my abilities openly, reached out once again. He requested a private meeting, ostensibly to explore collaboration opportunities. I agreed, curious to witness the transformation firsthand. When we met, he appeared humble, perhaps even contrite. "I've realized how wrong I was," he admitted. The work you've done, the innovation, the impact, it's incredible. I hope to learn from you and maybe even collaborate in some way. I smiled gently. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong, I said softly. It was about doing the work, seeing it through, and learning along the way. If collaboration benefits both of us, I'm open to it. There was no satisfaction in gloating, no desire for revenge. The moment was not about humiliation. It was about recognition and respect earned through years of perseverance and skill. As the year drew to a close, I reflected on the totality of the journey. The humiliation, skepticism, and rejection of the early days had been painful, yet transformative. They had forced me to refine my ideas, strengthen my resolve, and develop skills far beyond technical expertise: patience, diplomacy, strategic thinking, and leadership. The financial rewards, professional recognition, and partnerships were all meaningful, but the deepest satisfaction came from the personal growth and quiet validation of effort endured over time. One evening, as I reviewed global performance reports and strategic projections, I paused and allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The laughter of past skeptics had faded into silence. Executives and peers now sought guidance and collaboration. Investors recognized the value and integrity of the work, and I quietly understood that the journey had transformed not just my career, but my approach to life, the value of patience, persistence, and calm resolve. I thought of the long nights of refining the technology, the rejection letters, the doubts whispered by peers, and the silent disbelief of family and colleagues. Each moment of challenge had been a step toward this point of influence, recognition, and fulfillment. Yet, even as I acknowledged the external success, I knew that the most important triumph was internal: the knowledge that I had endured with integrity, pursued excellence without bitterness, and allowed results to speak louder than words. During a company-wide meeting, the CEO publicly acknowledged my contributions. There was no dramatization, no personal applause, just a calm, genuine recognition of the work, the guidance, and the results. The room felt lighter, more respectful, as employees and executives alike absorbed the acknowledgement. It was a moment of quiet fulfillment, a recognition not for ego, but for lasting impact. Later that week, I received a letter from a young professional I had mentored. It read, "Your journey and guidance have inspired me. I see now that patience, consistency, and integrity can achieve far more than confrontation or seeking revenge. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and showing that results speak louder than words." I read the words slowly, feeling a deep, reflective satisfaction. This, more than financial success or recognition, was the real payoff: the knowledge that the lessons learned from humiliation and rejection could guide and inspire others. And then, quietly, the full circle of the journey became apparent. The company that had rejected me was now thriving with my guidance. Former peers and skeptics acknowledged, sought advice, and collaborated. Investors recognized the tangible and intangible value of my work, and I had remained grounded, patient, and consistent throughout, never reacting with anger or bitterness, only with calm determination and skill. On a reflective evening, I sat alone, looking out at the city lights. The laughter, mockery, and dismissal of the past were gone, replaced by subtle acknowledgement, influence, and the deep personal satisfaction of knowing I had turned rejection into opportunity, humiliation into respect, and doubt into undeniable achievement. The journey had been long, at times lonely, and filled with moments of uncertainty, but it had forged resilience, insight, and quiet mastery. And in that calm, reflective moment, I understood the essential lesson: success achieved with patience, persistence, and integrity carries a satisfaction that no revenge, recognition, or external applause could ever match. The story of being dismissed, mocked, and underestimated had ended not with confrontation or humiliation, but with transformation, lasting influence, and the quiet, enduring triumph of consistent effort. The past no longer held power over me. Instead, it had become the foundation of growth, resilience, and personal fulfillment. And as I closed my laptop, ready to face the next chapter of opportunities, collaborations, and innovations. I smiled softly. The journey from rejection to recognition, from humiliation to respect, and from doubt to undeniable success had come full circle. And the real victory, the one that mattered most, was not in proving anyone wrong, but in quietly achieving excellence, influence, and fulfillment with patience, integrity, and unwavering dedication.